Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Serious, eerie towns, disappearing diners, and creepy gas stations. What's your true, unexplained story of being in a place that shouldn't exist? Episode 12. There's a federal building in my old one that is rumored to have underground tunnels from back when it was a hospital. They would move the bodies of the deceased through them, and between being a hospital and being a federal building, a lot of homeless people would reside in there, but that's as far as it goes for being spooky, and for the most part it was mostly just used for maintenance stuff and such like that. The rumors definitely exist, and they get spread around a lot, but nobody could really confirm whether they were real or not, and asking the people who would know won't get you any results. My grandpa used to work in that building, and being someone who was higher in security than most, knew just about every nook and cranny of the building. He would tell me about them from time to time and always promised me he would take me to see them, but he never fulfilled before he passed away. However, and luckily for me, in a sort of roundabout way I guess, I got to be in the opening entrance to one of these tunnels. A few years ago I was picking up odd jobs here and there, and I got a position being the mascot for a local baseball team. Every year the federal building holds a sort of small fair for the employees, and they get big local places to participate. Thankfully the team I was working for was on the roster that year, and all in all it was pretty cool. Now when you first enter the building you have to go through a security checkpoint, and that's expected with government buildings like these. We transported the mascot suit in a big duffel bag, and the luggage checking X-ray machine couldn't fit it. The guy running the machine asked if there was anything that I shouldn't have, i.e., weapons, drugs, etc. Now I've got a tendency to say stupid things at the worst possible times, and of course when he asked me if there was anything in the bag I said, a body. He grabbed the bag, and another officer ushered me off to a room on back down a hallway to search my bag and I assume interrogate me for the body in the bag. Of course they opened it up and realized I was with the team, but they still held me for a bit to talk about the seriousness of their jobs and how I shouldn't be making jokes like that around them. After all that, they had asked if I needed a private place to get ready, and I said yeah, so they again ushered me down the same hall a bit more into another room with a sign that said authorized clearance or something like that. The guard was still outside the door but held it open a bit. The room was pretty small but big enough for me to get dressed. On the wall opposite the door I came in was another door with no sign, but it had one of those fob key locks on it and a small window, just like most doors you'd see in this building. Looking through the window you could see a well-illuminated stairwell that went down for quite a while then straight, but you really couldn't see anything. Since I was on the bottom floor of the building, which was already below floor 1, I knew that this had to be one of the underground tunnels. I didn't waste too much time trying to get a good look through the window, but it was nothing like what I thought. I always assumed they were dark and poorly lit, but it totally wasn't. I'm not going to say that there were top secret things going on down there or anything suspicious, but being able to see something that was always just a rumor definitely sent chills down me back. My best assumption is that it was just used to get to the plant that pressed currency or something like that, since they were both very close to each other. Another theory of mine is that it's locked down just to preserve the history of the building. For 91 years ago, in Sepang, Malaysia, when my dad and I were staying to go to the F1 Grand Prix at the time, stayed in such a creepy hotel. When we arrived the place just gave me the chills. The hotel was empty, and we initially thought it was closed, even though we had a room booked. There was no one at the front desk until about 5 minutes. The man arrived and did not say anything and just gave us the key. We walked to our room, where it's like a separate house for every 2 rooms. The houses surround a pool. The room is so dark even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Even when the lights were on, the room was still dark. The room was awfully run down with mold, the place was basically falling apart. The bathroom was the worst, the bathtub looked as if there were blood stains in it. The pool outside had leaves covering the pool, as if there was no maintenance at all. There was no staff around too. We had food at the restaurant in the hotel. Again, there was so little staff and there was no one else in the restaurant too. I think the waiter was the only one who worked in the restaurant, so he was cooking and serving us. The worst was at night, there were no lights and difficult to distinguish the houses, and we still didn't see any other residents and staff. We had to spend the weekend there, and it just gave me such chills walking around the complex. We barely spent any time there, just asleep. 3. Not my story but my mom's. She's the sort of person who can rationalize everything, but she doesn't have an answer for this. She and my dad were driving from Miami to Nashville, so a long drive. They set off in the evening and estimated to get halfway to Atlanta at around 2 a.m. where they had booked a hotel room for the night. It was about 11 p.m. and they were in the middle of nowhere. They saw a small convenience store in the distance and decided to stop in to get snacks and to stretch their legs. They pulled in the parking lot and entered the store. My mom said it had a strange empty atmosphere, as if she and my dad were the only people in the whole world. She dismissed it as it was late and there was nobody in the store. They walked around the aisles, joking around with each other for around 10 minutes. They took their items to the clerk, who my mom said was a friendly-looking old lady. She wished them a safe journey and they left the store and got in the car. My dad started driving down the road again and asked my mom what the time was. My mom looked at her watch and was shocked to see it was 2:30 a.m., somehow 3 hours and 30 minutes had passed in the store without them knowing. My mom, being the sort of person she is, managed to dismiss this and said that they must have lost track of time. When they were returning back to Florida, they drove past the convenience store again, at around 11 p.m. again. As they drove past, they glanced in and saw the same clerk grinning and waving to them. 4. This is oddly specific and a question I've been waiting for because my insanity has led me to believe that I visit these places in my dreams often. Like, this veil is lifted onto a different perspective and sometimes you get to see a point of land in a different outcome of the reality you live on. Lucky people and randomly chosen ones get to experience it in real life, but I visit these locations in my dreams. I have like 10 places I frequent and can describe them in detail. It's always hinted on location that I'll never be back there again, or not very often ever anymore, but I get to see hordes of people having good times at magnificently beautiful venues. But I think they're mostly people specifically wishing to be there. I know it sounds crazy, but someday someone's going to tell you about meeting a person who was at the same venue in some type of dynamic, and they'll know, and it'll be amazing. There's something to this, I tell you. But hey, I'm just some guy. 5. I've been there twice, both times felt creepy. Aurora, Oregon. I can't describe it exactly, but in a word, I felt unwelcome. I went there with my mom once and we both felt creeped out. People were looking at us, but not in a friendly like, who are those people, way. It was more like, what are you doing in my town, kind of way, and the town just had generally bad vibes. I remember feeling super creeped out by the way people treated me, and we noted out there pretty quick never to return. 6. Went to a college near the Mississippi River. My friend and I were bored one night, so we grabbed a couple beers and went across the river in his Jeep and found some trails. We went driving down one, then backing up when it came to an end or the terrain got too ugly, and then tried another one. Eventually we went down one and it started getting foggy. We kept going and then all of a sudden my buddy stopped and said, "It feels a little weird that it's getting so foggy so fast." We got out of the car, walked ahead about 10 to 15 feet and then realized there was a cliff that ran to a creek which connected to the river. If we had driven another second or so we would have went nose down what looked like a 25 feet embankment into a creek bed. 7. Near Milan main airport, Alpena, there is a ghost town named Case Nova. It was a town built for airport employees and staff, but its vicinity to the main runway made it impossible to live there. In the late 90s we're speaking of a flight every minute or so. Now most house doors and windows are literally walled. I was driving through the place because I was inspecting the methane pipework. It was 8 in the morning, when people should thrive and go to work. That place was dead. Silent. Eerie. Unsettling. I just drove away. 8. I was in a band that did some regional touring, stretches on the road for a week or two at a time, stuff like that. One time, we were driving outside of Mississippi and the highway took a detour through this little backwoods town of maybe 600 people or so. Anyway, it's like 3 a.m. and even though all of the lights are out in the town, every street is filled with people walking up and down it. No cars. No flashlights. Just hundreds of people walking up and down the street. They all kind of stopped and stared at us as we drove past, but I always wondered if they intentionally detoured the road through that town. 9. About 20 years ago I was driving with my then girlfriend from Redmond, Washington to somewhere in eastern Washington. Along the way we stopped for snacks at this little town off the highway and down a hidden little road. There were children of the corn creepy. They avoided us as much as they could. When we bought our snacks they told us the price with no accompanied niceties. They side-eyed us. And when we drove away, a few came outside to watch us leave as if they wanted to make sure we were leaving. On our return trip, we wanted to show this town to some friends who had taken a separate car. They drove out like the day before, and the town simply wasn't there. It was the same spot on the highway, but there was no side road. We searched for like half an hour, but it was just gone. 10. I was driving in a military convoy through Slab City, CA. On the way in there were plenty of people to be seen, but concrete slabs everywhere. A few old bumpers pull campers. No cars anywhere. On the way back out it was like a ghost town. I later learned that Slab City is more of a haven for those who have been rejected by society. It was a really creepy place to drive through and significantly creepier when I learned about Salvation Mountain. 11. The closest I've come to this is cycling from my hometown in Scotland to Edinburgh. No paranormal explanation necessary, just a trick of the mind and how it perceives time. The distance is about 17 miles altogether, and if you do it by the direct road with the rest of the traffic it seems to take ages. But if you take a particular longer route, turn off the main road, zigzag through a town called South Queensbury, down some steps, along a former railway line that is now a long path. Then onto a road that passes through some fields, you end up on the outskirts of Edinburgh having traveled a further distance, and taken more time to do it, but so much more enjoyably that the first time I did it I was spooked. I remember realizing after that first run on my bike that I was looking at a landmark that existed on the outskirts of Edinburgh and being struck with uneasy amazement. How did I get here so quickly? Then onto a road that passes through some fields, you end up on the outskirts of Edinburgh having traveled a further distance, and taken more time to do it, but so much more enjoyably that the first time I did it I was spooked. I remember realizing after that first run on my bike that I was looking at a landmark that existed on the outskirts of Edinburgh and being struck with uneasy amazement. How did 12 ID what the town was called or where it was located specifically? All I know was that I went through it on the way from Gun Barrel City, Texas to Tyler, Texas. It looked like a movie set almost. Three-way stoplight street. Businesses on both sides without a single light on, but you could see no houses and just empty, barren streets from the stoplight. Passed through it that one time, but on the way back through and on multiple return trips I never located it again. That I get here so quickly. 13. Between Milan Alpina International Airport and Turin there is a turnoff with a pizza place that is open extremely late and serves truffle pizza with truffle oil. We went once in the dead of night. At the time, my brother was a kid and had a habit of looking at a menu and ordering the most expensive thing. The truffle pizza was 33k lira, an exorbitant price for pizza, mid-90s. This time my dad had been pushed to the end of his wits and refused to let my brother order the truffle pizza. When the pizza came they were out of this world delicious, perhaps supernatural. Everyone agreed they wished they would have splurged for the truffle pizza. They vowed to return and try it on our next trip through the area. For over 20 years we have searched for the pizza place or even the appropriate exit. We have never been able to find a trace of this place again. Anyone who's driven west out of Milan Airport knows the drive is confusing enough, routing you through random villages and fields. When Google Maps were common we thought that'd be our chance, but the exit name doesn't come up. My brother has been complaining about not getting that pizza for 20 years. Literally no pizza has measured up to the memory of that place. 14. In Solvay, New York, near Route 695, there's a small body of water there where the next-door crucible factory dumped chemicals, and the water is this weird shade of green due to the sheer amount of crap that's been dumped into it. Onondaga Lake is right next to it. One night, my mom and I were in the car on the way home and we passed by that body of water. When we passed by, I saw a small building with a single window and the lights on inside. As soon as I looked at that building, I got hit with this wave of dread/evil/darkness whatever. It was strong and my mom felt it too. We've passed by bodies of water several times since and I've never seen that building again. Now here's the thing, there is a small maintenance building right next to the body of water, but it has no windows. I kept calling a body of water because I'm not sure if it qualifies as a large pond or a small lake. 15. I'll go with Devil's Lake, WI. I went camping there with a group of people on Friday the 13th, pretty much everything that could go wrong did: someone being attacked by spiders while rock climbing, check, it raining right after we set up all the tents, check, it having a thunderstorm the entire night, quadruple check, and the entire boat ride being scenic yet creepy there and back, double check. 16. I was once with my family at a diner up in Maine, not too far out in the middle of nowhere, but in Maine, so middle of nowhere, and there was a very long wait for the table, around 45 minutes, so I decided to go for a walk down this path adjacent to the diner. Now, at the time, I didn't think too much of the path, just a standard dirt road surrounded by trees, fairly common for Maine. As I walked this path, it kept curving and curving to the point where I was starting to get a little confused as to how I wasn't backtracking in a circle. Eventually, it ended, and I wound up on a campsite, but the weird thing is that it was quiet. Now I'm not talking about no cars or people or anything, which again is pretty common in rural Maine. I'm talking quietly, as in no sounds from birds, animals, insects, etc. Additionally, the area seemed almost drained of color, with everything seemingly having a grayish tint except for this old Dr. Pepper machine which kept blinking on and off, although I'll chalk that up to the overcast sky and my overactive imagination. At this point, I felt fairly creeped out by all this, so I noted out of there, and as I slowly entered society the color and sound slowly bled back in. After that, things were pretty normal besides the fact that it rained frogs on the way home. Now all this isn't too creepy on its own, but the part that really freaked me out was this: later on, I checked Google Maps and the path I went down was real, same deal with the campsite. However, the map said it was perfectly straight. It was a while back so some of the details are hazy, but I distinctly remember the spiral path, and other people I was with also recall the path having a curve. Given this evidence, the only logical conclusion to be made is that I inadvertently stumbled upon the realm of a sleeping elder god who takes the form of a Dr. Pepper machine, and that we should all make the most of our lives before it wakes and consumes us all. 17. I was in the middle of a road trip across the country to see national parks and a lot of the country. We just finished a few days of driving the PCH and were cutting across Oregon heading to Yellowstone. It was about 1 o'clock in the middle of rural Idaho and we needed gas. I stopped to fill up in this weird little gas station and went inside to use the restroom and get some caffeine. When I get inside the gas station it's really dim and it's actually a super creepy dance club. Like the creepiest meatheads you have ever seen dancing. It was super weird. I just turned around and walked out and told the other guys we should leave. 18. I was sent to a wilderness rehabilitation school similar to Outward Bound. This was in Arizona near the Verde River. So basically, we wandered onto this old ghost town. Think about the Western-style films and that's what was there. There was a bunch of random buildings, and we were looking for a cool place to camp that night, so we were thinking about setting up camp in one of the old pavilion-style structures. That is until we came into a clearing right off the beaten path of the town. There were about 10 statues of a human man, but on the top of the head was a different religious symbol, the cross, Star of David, Islamic crescent, etc., and they were all arranged in a circle. And then 20 feet behind the statues on the trees were 3 noses. We hopped out of there as fast as we could. 19. I was with some friends, and we were walking through an older part of town. There was this gazebo that we had never seen before. No surprise, we never go this far, and we sat down to rest. It was covered in graffiti, and we were examining it. One of my friends noticed something weird. All 3 of our names are carved into the wood. I get this feeling in my chest that something bad is going to happen, so we booked it. We end up getting lost, and since we live in a rural area with no public transportation, I call my mom for directions, era of phones with keyboards. She picks us up and I ask her about the gazebo since she grew up here. It takes her a while, but she finally remembers it. Nothing particularly exciting, but when she was a kid apparently they used to dare each other to market at night. 20. Weird little town, dead center of Florida. We passed through it on the way from Palm Beach to Tampa. It's called Hee Haw Junction. I think there are a gas station and an empty gas station. Population 240. The name just sounds like a place an ethnic person shouldn't break down near at night. 21. This is probably too late, but when I was about 11, a few friends of mine and I climbed over my neighbor's fence. Among other things, we found a few dumpsters with lots of broken glass next to them, old, decrepit houses, despite the fact we live in a relatively new neighborhood, and an old pet carrier. I don't remember if we brought it or not. There were also lots and lots of dolls near the dumpsters. Think about the island of the dolls, and you'll see almost exactly what we saw. Oh yeah, and there was a shed behind my house. I have no idea what it was doing there, but it's still there, I think. 22. I'm an urban explorer. I've been to so many creepy houses I've lost count. Many that quite literally shouldn't be there due to safety. I did have one location that upon opening the door I had a full sense of dread and sadness comes over me. It took me 10 minutes to muster up the nerve to go in. I haven't had that feeling at any other location. 23. At the time I was attending a course at the University of Texas which lasted around 6 months. Returning to careers if I remember. During one of those nights as I was going to my car I just felt that everything fell off. It was around a full moon, and everything on the ground was lit up. I could see perfectly without a flashlight. I ended up driving off and getting lost around the area. At the stretch of road I was on just got pitch black all of a sudden, and there were no cars or lights. Then I ended up in the back roads with these houses that looked as ugly as Steve Bascom's face. I hit something and found some asshole's dog had torn up a garbage bag that had glass, rocks, and some vile rotten all over the road. The neighborhood gave me a creepy vibe. No light other than from my car, no noise. No dogs barking at all. No cats running around. It was like everything had just gone up and gone. I eventually found myself back near the highway. Got a handgun and a concealed carry permit after the experience. They say you should not be afraid of the dark. Those that say that never went out of the city into the boonies and all nowhere region of the suburbs. I am not in the mood to get hunted with whatever is hiding in it. 24. In my dreams, I travel on a long and twisted highway, sometimes driving, sometimes by roller coaster metro, to a vast, luscious, and mountainous forest with a beach that regularly has boats very close to the coast, with aircraft that launch from them. In this ocean, there is a lone metal corridor which looks like a shipping container, but is a deep, straight, and dark tunnel. There is a secret at the end of the tunnel, but I have not been able to make it to the end without waking up. 25. I have a story. Couple years back and I decided to drive up to San Francisco from Los Angeles, and we take the scenic coastal route. After we were on the road for a while I decided to take a shortcut through some mountains where there's a Chumash reservation and casino. Once we get back to the main road, I-101, we find the first exit that has food and gas. We get off to pump gas at this old-looking Chevron. Even though it was around midday, the place felt weird, and it seemed like everyone at the gas station was staring at us. We thought nothing of it and filled the tank, got some snacks and continued the drive. On the way back, my GF's brother and his go tag along with us. The drive back was kind of harsh because it was nighttime and it was pouring. My GF's brother was driving and he let us know that he's going stop to pump gas and use the restroom. And this is where it gets weird. When we got to the gas station, it turns out to be the exact same one I stopped on the way, but this time it was closed and it seemed like it hadn't been open for quite some time. One thing I should mention is that we only went to San Francisco for a long weekend, so it didn't make sense for that particular gas station to look like it did on the drive back. I kind of joke around and tell my go that it's like an episode of The Twilight Zone where we never made to San Francisco and that we were stuck in that gas station. 26. Plenty of creepy things happen on road trips, but this one threw me off. I was on a school trip with a small group of activities board members heading to a conference in Myrtle Beach. We had just crossed into SC, driving back roads at the behest of Wade. It was about 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. The sun was just beginning to set. We had been driving on back roads for a while and other than traffic and the occasional house, we hadn't seen much else out of the ordinary. Until we reached this town that hasn't showed up on the GPS. There was an uneasy feeling as we pulled into town, like something wasn't right. It was confirmed as we craped down Main Street at 25 miles per hour. It took us a few minutes but we finally found the source of our feeling. There was nobody in the town. Lights were on in stores and restaurants, but nobody was inside. No cars on the road or in any parking lots, nobody walking a dog down the street, no kids on bikes, just nothing. It wasn't run down or abandoned, it looked like any other quaint small town. For about 5 minutes driving through this town, it was like the whole world had stopped or disappeared. As we reached the other side of town we finally saw a sign of life. There was a small church just off the road. Still no cars in the parking lot but as we drove by there was just one man, the priest, standing out front watching us drive by. He was staring directly at our van and followed us with his eyes until we got out of sight. I didn't even touch the brakes for the next hour. 27. I went to school in the northern part of New York State, north of the Adirondack Mountains. One beautiful fall night, some friends and I decided to get in one of our cars and go on a night drive through the mountains to look at the stars. There were 5 of us, my roommate driving, me in the driver's seat, and 2 girls and a guy in the back seat. We headed into the mountains and found a beautiful place to pull off and look at the stars for a while. It was a crisp, clear night, and in the middle of nowhere with no light pollution, the stars were breathtaking. After a while, my roommate mentioned that he used to drive past a place called Joe Indian Pond on the way to campus when we started the semester, and he wanted to check it out. We all agreed, so we got back in the car and headed out to find it. My roommate found this small dirt road that he thought was the way to Joe Indian Pond, and we headed down it. There were old trees hanging over the road on both sides. Earlier it was a crystal clear night, but there were suddenly knots of fog that would wisp over the car as we drove through them. We started to get a little freaked out. And then we passed the graveyard. There was a red, metal pole fence along the road, and just beyond it were a small handful of very old gravestones, the kind that are pitted and rough from decades, maybe centuries of wear. This was weird. None of us wanted to say anything to acknowledge our fear, but when one of us suggested we turn around and go back, the rest of us were only too happy to agree. My roommate started to pull a U-turn. For a brief moment the headlights shined deep into the woods, and I felt a surge of adrenaline, half expecting to see something in the forest. We started heading back to the main road and I decided to up the ante. I lightly tapped my roommate's leg and gave him the play-along eyebrows. I pointed out my window. Holy! Did you see that out there? My roommate slammed on the brakes. See what? he asked. The guy in the back seat started screaming. The girls in the back started screaming. My roommate and I started screaming, even though we knew we were the ones playing the prank. He stood on the gas, and we tore out of those woods, screaming the whole way, until we hit the main road, where our screams turned into laughs. Good times. 28. So, we own a summer home on an island in Cape Cod, MA. So I was walking in the woods and I came across a river. I thought it was strange because it's a small island and there are no rivers. I found a dead tree going across the river, so I walked across it. Then I found an old cabin with music coming out of it. I wanted to leave but I didn't, so I went into the cabin. The music stopped and I heard scurrying, it sounded like claws. I booed and when I went to show my sister the river and cabin it was gone. I've looked on Google Maps and there was no trace of a river or a cabin. More creepy. 29. I walked into a Sears at the mall the other day. I have no idea how either of those things are still around. It's really a weird experience. It's like a camp store in there. They've simply stopped putting price tags on things because they're understaffed and can't keep up with what's being liquidated today. All of the US-made Craftsman stuff is no more, replaced with worse than Harbor Freight China Siam. It's sad to see it go. 30. I was driving with my cousin out to North Carolina last year to go visit my sister, brother-in-law, and niece. We decided to drive mostly straight through the night, and we were passing through West Virginia really late when we decided to pull over for a quick nap in a rest stop. After about an hour or two I woke up and also saw we needed gas. There was a nearby town with a BP on the way, so I decided to pull in there. After filling up, I was just about to drive off, when I noticed a car had pulled up behind me, but somehow I hadn't heard it. I commented about it to my cousin as I was starting the car, when I heard a tap on the window. It was a cop, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't jump in my seat when I heard the knock. I roll down the window and she asks what we're doing there. Just getting gas. We were low. You know this place is closed, right? It was about 2 in the morning, but card readers don't shut down just because the store does. Well, yes, but I used my credit card. Can I see your IDs? I was about to say no and tell her she had no reason to check our IDs, but I wasn't about to get me and my cousin shot by some random cop in WV, so I handed mine over and got my cousin to hand hers over. After the cop handed them back she said it was odd seeing out-of-towners here late at night. I know what she's thinking, drug dealers, but there was literally a drug deal happening behind her in the parking lot over that I could see in my rear view. I saw cash and other things exchange hands, but I didn't say anything until she left us alone. Once we left, we decided we were never going to pull into this town again. Funny thing is, this is not the only time I've had run-ins with cops while driving with my cousin. For some reason we get stopped or pulled over when we're driving together, but never for anything other than the one speeding ticket I got because I thought I was in a 65. 31. I was doing some selling in Michigan and a pink random average-looking neighborhood to sell our product. As soon as we drove into the neighborhood it was off. It was 2 city blocks completely empty except for a few scattered houses. All of his teachers were overgrown. It was like something from The Last of Us. The other odd thing was the Romanian houses that were there all had children's artwork on it and Bible verses. It looks like they had come in to try to make the area look pleasant. However, it had been at least a few years, I would say 6 or 7, since they did that, so all the work started to slowly getting craped over by the environment. We drove around the neighborhood for a good hour just because it was so out there. I'm sure other people posted about it, but it caught me off guard. You ended up only finding one person who lived in the empty sprawl. They're very kind of pleasant. Go figure. I'll try to see if I can find pictures we took and host way back home to my work computer. 32. When I and a friend got our driving licenses, we celebrated by driving around, really just exploring, particularly on the weekends. We drove around a lot and went on a road trip of about 2,500 kilometers where we spent 2 weeks driving and living in a car basically. During out-road explorations, which usually took place at night and in rural or mountainous areas, because that is more fun, we sometimes drove hundreds of kilometers over the course of a weekend, purposefully getting lost, only to try to find out way back and only breaking out the map/tom when we absolutely had no idea how to get back. We found a path that went off one of the main roads in a very rural area and drove down it, until we came to a gate and fence. Beyond the gate and fence, there was surface quarry with huge mining machines, so we climbed over the gate and ventured closer to the quarry, so we could watch. The whole thing looked spooky but fascinating because you could only see the lights on the machines and the lights that illuminated the conveyor belts that carried off the mined materials. We spent a good hour close to the edge of the quarry before one of the workers there spotted us when the machine's drill head came by us and yelled at us to get out. A few years later, we got another chance to go for one of our road trips and we looked for that path that led to the quarry, but we couldn't find it, although it is entirely possible it actually is gone because the quarry might have expanded and swallowed up the path before the quarry was walled off. 33. About 20 years ago I was driving with my then girlfriend from Redmond, Washington to somewhere in eastern Washington. Along the way we stopped for snacks at this little town off the highway and down a hidden little road. There were children of the corn creepy. They avoided us as much as they could. When we bought our snacks they told us the price with no accompanied niceties. They side-eyed us. And when we drove away, a few came outside to watch us leave as if they wanted to make sure we were leaving. On our return trip, we wanted to show this town to some friends who had taken a separate car. They drove out like the day before, and the town simply wasn't there. It was the same spot on the highway, but there was no side road. We searched for like half an hour, but it was just gone. 34. A place back home known as Lagrange Mountain. There were rumors of cults and devil worshippers up there. But really it was the Dixie Mafia type folks growing weed and making moonshine. The rumors kept people away though. It was a good place to go parking and occasionally you would happen upon someone's grow operation and get chased away. Then you could tell tales of getting chased off the mountain by the Satanists. 35. My family was driving up the East Coast and we stopped at a gas station in the mountains somewhere in Georgia. It was well after sunset and as we pulled into this gas station a crazy thick fog rolled in. Like I couldn't see the other side of this 2-lane street thick. Top it off with a blinking yellow traffic light in town's only intersection. I swear I half expected Pyramid Head to just stroll into the corner of my vision. The fog completely dissipated less than a quarter mile away from the gas station. 36. When I was a child, I traveled with my friend to his father's hunting cabin, for a couple of days in the winter. This whole area of our country is dominated by woods, it's all you see. Anyway, close to his cabin there was this creepy haunted old sawmill, and not far from there was this circular train track switcher. I and my friend saw this train track switcher, with a train wagon on it, in 30 centimeters deep snow. The next day the wagon was gone, snow still in place. And the train track had not been used for over a decade. We were truly worried. 37. So, I and some friends were backpacking through Laos and Cambodia 3 years back, and one of our many stays was on an island village in Si Pham Don, on the Mekong River that runs through the two countries. Anyway, we were walking through the main street looking for a decent hostel, and we came across this old, ruined building that looked to be French colony era. While back, we walked around it and took some photos cause it was pretty cool, which is when we spotted a small playground behind it. We walked over to this eerie-looking assembly of rusted stuff swings and broken slide etc. and noticed there was also like these long narrow cabins that ran either side of the play yard, probably about 4 rooms long each, completely boarded up. Every door. Every window. A couple of doors have the knobs missing but we were too terrified to look through the holes. We asked a local down the road what the deal was with that place. He explained in his best English that it was the local school and it got boarded up during summer holidays, and we asked why the hell a primary school needs boarding up and he didn't say anything else about the matter. To be honest, he made himself pretty scarce after that. No one else would tell us anything about the cabins, and no one else said anything about it being a school or even anything about the ruins in front of it. We slept outside of the village in our tents and left as the sun rose the next morning. 38. Back when I was around 12 to 13, I had been dragged to another one of my dad's meetings. There are a few of us kids around the same age that got dragged to these things a few times a year. This one happened to be in a wooden hotel that was legendarily haunted. Being dumbass kids with free time, we decided to explore the haunted hotel. As we wandered the top floor, we came upon some stairs leading up to the very top floor. The stairs were roped off with a sign saying, "No access." Being jackass kids, we stood there daring each other to go upstairs, where the ghosts are. After a minute or so, we hear footsteps above us coming towards the stairs. We all freeze and pretend like nothing was happening. The steps got closer. Much closer. We heard someone coming down the stairs. We all turned, but there was no one there. But there were footprints in the carpet, and they kept coming down the stairs. We all screamed and hauled back to the lobby where the people were. The next day we gathered all of our courage and made our way back to find the stairs. We were ready to start daring each other to go up again. Except it was a dead end. There were no stairs anymore. When we asked around, we were told there was no floor above the one was standing on and the stairs never existed. I have been back there 6 to 7 times over the years trying to find those stairs with no luck. But I've heard similar stories of those same stairs for other people. Other people have seen them, but only once and never again. It still freaks me out. 39. We ended up driving through abandoned unfamiliar countryside while the GPS insisted that we were almost there. I proceeded to make things creepier than they really had to be. One time, my mom, one of my cousins, and I were driving her back to her house around midnight after seeing a play. My mom was using her car GPS even though we had driven on this road many times before and she would know where she was going. We were driving through the winding road through the middle of nowhere. The GPS would verbally alert us several times to any turns we needed to make and give us plenty of time to make the turn, so it was pretty useful. About 10 minutes into the trip, I figured that since the area is slightly creepy anyways, and as I cannot be trusted with small portable speakers, I should make it more so. I started playing the opening to Fire on High by Electric Light Orchestra, and that freaked my cousin Amy out. After laughing, holding up my portable speakers, and explaining what I had done, Amy sulked and turned away from me. This time period of a minute at most would have been the only chance for us to miss a turn, and I think one of the 3 people would have heard it, and I am also fairly sure that our turn was further up. We continued driving. Our GPS told us to follow the road. After a while, we had a quiet conversation. Maybe 40 minutes into the drive, Amy realized something. It's been saying we are 20 minutes away for the last 20 minutes. She wailed. Ah. I too had the realization that we had been driving for way too long. We didn't have any way to figure out what was going on, so we continued driving on into the darkness. Our GPS hadn't failed us before, and it was usually fairly reliable about estimating the times at the very least. We were all quiet. We entered a little town. None of us knew where it was or what it was called. Maybe I was just getting spooked, but you know how traffic signs are slightly reflective? It didn't seem like these ones were. We were all silent, until I joked that we should ask for directions. The other 2 glared at me. We went back to being silent. I started to sing in an effort to make myself feel less freaked out. Unfortunately, my singing voice sounds very creepy, so that made everyone else in the car more freaked out, and they started to yell at me. I was only singing Lela, it's not even a creepy song. So, we went back to driving through the darkness in silence. We had enough gas that we weren't in danger. We drove on until eventually our GPS started actually counting down the time instead of just saying we were 20 minutes away. We left the theater around 11:30. Google tells me it's a 43-minute drive. We reached our destination after 1. My mom and I drove back in 40 minutes. Maybe we just missed a turn because our GPS malfunctioned in a way it had never done before and then we just all got nervous. That could happen. I still don't know where we were or what happened, though. 40. When I was about 12, my mom and I were traveling cross-country to move. We were staying the night in Missouri, at a typical roadside hotel next to an Applebee's, so we went in for dinner. It was packed, despite us being one of only a couple guests at the hotel, so we sat up at the bar. We noticed something weird after a few seconds. Every single person had a glass of milk in front of them. Even the dudes around the bar. Nothing else, just a tall glass of milk. Someone opened the fridge under the center bar, and we saw just gallons of milk. The bartender took our dinner orders and brought each of us a glass of milk without us asking for anything to drink. It was so weird. My mom told me not to drink it. On our way back to our room, my mom stopped at the front desk and asked the woman working there, half jokingly and half concerned, why everyone drinks so much milk in this town. The woman said she had no idea what she was talking about, and we just moved on. When we were putting our leftovers in the mini fridge up in our room, there were like 10 mini cartons of milk. No brand, just the word milk in black lettering. It was a weird place and I've never been able to figure it out. 41. I was driving back from Atlanta to Austin. I drove a GMC Sierra Denali Ultimate, company issued as I worked for GM at the time. I don't remember exactly where on I-20 this was, but I remember watching a car smack into another car and then flip. This was between two exits that were at least 10 miles apart. As I came to a complete stop on the interstate, I spent about 5 minutes asking if the other drivers were okay. They said they were, so I went on my way. Getting back into the truck, I saw the gas gauge was 3/4 full. Good, I thought. This has enough gas to get me out of this. At the time, I didn't think about the fact I had driven at least 200 miles since I left Atlanta, so I assumed the gauge was accurate. In my defense, it was my second long trip in the truck. I originally drove over to Atlanta, and the truck had less than 1,000 miles. I was used to filling it up constantly, but that was in the city, not on the highway. In any case, I began to travel back down I-20 when I heard a loud ringing sound followed by a message on the DIC. Low fuel. The range had jumped from 250 miles to low in a matter of seconds. As I started doing the math, I figured out that I was about 430 miles away from Atlanta, so this makes a ton of sense. My guess was that it was the heat screwing with the system. Shortly after the low fuel, I saw an exit on the interstate with one single location listed under gas and food. Having no real choice, I decided to pull off and get gas. I pulled up to what was effectively a trailer with a gas pump, one of the really old ones with physical numbers. I was greeted with a cold stare from the man who was in the store. Our conversation went like this: "Hi there, I'd like to get $60 on the pump please, I'm holding my company card out." "We don't take Amex." He mutters, quietly. "Oh okay, here's a Visa then," as I hold out my personal card. "We don't take Visa." He begins to look upset. "MasterCard? Discover? I have those too." "No. We don't take cards." Okay, I don't have cash, is there an ATM nearby?" "Maybe. You may want to go check in town." "Where is the town?" "I don't see any signs you're already in it." At this point, I'm creeped out, but I still go along with it. "Oh okay, so then where would I find the ATM?" "We don't have 1 inch, he laughs relatively hard. I start thinking he has to be with me. There's no way this man is serious. Regardless, I was tired of the game, so I decided to risk my gas levels to get home. Haha, that's a good one. Let me go check to see if my truck has any change floating around in the truck. I go to the truck and try and start it, nothing. It was literally completely out of gas. Okay, lovely, I started searching my car for anything. I had about 43 cents in loose change. I go back to the shop and say, this is going to sound crazy, but I have 43 cents. Is there any chance you can lend me a few gallons of gas so I can get to an ATM? I'd be happy to leave my ID with you, so you know I'll come back. The guy just stares at me and says, no. But I'm willing to exchange services with you. Stupidly, I asked, services? What do you mean? He just sat with a blank stare for about 10 seconds and then said, you know what I'm talking about, boy. I was like, nope, that. I left immediately and went back to the truck. I realized I was parked on an incline, leading me to think that maybe the truck wasn't starting due to the gas level. I put it in neutral, rolled down the hill in the parking lot, and then basically had the rear of the truck above the engine. I tried starting the truck again, it was enough. Thankfully, the next gas station was 6 miles away. I drove over with the lightest acceleration ever, keeping the speed exactly at 55. As I pulled up to the next gas station, my truck died again. Thankfully the pumps were the digital kind which took cards. To this day, I still don't remember where that station was. I looked for it every time I drove between ATL and AUS and never found it again. Approximately 10 trips. To put perspective on this story. I'm a white male, 6 feet 2 inches, and a bit on the heavy side. The clerk was around twice my size and also male. The second. About 10 years ago, I drove down to ATL with an ex for a small trip. We had to stop and get gas. I didn't know the area, so we stopped in Bankhead thinking was Bulkhead to get directions and gas. I thought it was weird that Bulkhead was supposedly a nice area, yet everything looked like it was burnt, falling apart, or destroyed. The ex had no idea she wrote Bankhead when she printed the directions. Anyway, I pull up to the pump and this older man comes over to me and says, "You looking for something?" "No, I'm just getting gas." He then stares at me and says, "Can I have $1?" I look back, say, "I have no cash, I'm sorry." He immediately says, "You're in the wrong part of town, boy." Okay, creepy homeless dude. Thank you. I go inside the station to get directions, thinking he was just crazy. As soon as I walked in, the clerk said, "What are you doing here?" I say, "I'm just trying to get directions." He immediately responds with, "Well, turn around the way you came and get white boy." Yeah, it's been 10 years since I've been to Bankhead with the exception of recently when we had to drive through it to get wedding invitations. 43. There is a graveyard in our town with a lot of older graves and tombstones. There was a spot that we found with a tombstone that had a very unique name that I can't recall anymore. When my friends and I went back maybe a few weeks later, we couldn't find the grave anywhere. It wasn't even in an inconspicuous place, it was very close to the road. Everything else looked exactly the same, unchanged. Still can't explain that one. 44. For some reason my GF and I had it in our heads to pick up some rocks from the old quarry to put in our garden. It's not exactly out in the woods, but it did border one of the local reservations. We are picking out some nice stones and putting them into the trunk when this guy in an old rundown car slowly drives by eyeing us. About 10 minutes later he pulls up next to us and gets out. He looks like an old biker with faded tattoos and asks us, "Hey, have you gone up that road there behind the quarry? Do you know what's there?" "No, I have no idea, kind sir, and my GF and I will be leaving right now and we won't be returning ever." "Thank you." Learned later it was a biker safe house. 45. For some reason my GF and I had it in our heads to pick up some rocks from the old quarry to put in our garden. It's not exactly out in the woods, but it did border one of the local reservations. We are picking out some nice stones and putting them into the trunk when this guy in an old rundown car slowly drives by eyeing us. About 10 minutes later he pulls up next to us and gets out. He looks like an old biker with faded tattoos and asks us, "Hey, have you gone up that road there behind the quarry? Do you know what's there?" "No, I have no idea, kind sir, and my GF and I will be leaving right now and we won't be returning ever." "Thank you." Learned later it was a biker-safe house. 46. I was once at a holiday camp in a big house that used to be a hospital for TB, I believe. I was in a room with 3 others. In the middle of the night, I was woken up by a loud persistent banging noise. I sat up and noticed the other girls were asleep, but the wardrobe in the corner was shaking. Keep in mind this was a big heavy hardwood wardrobe. It continued for about 5 minutes straight. Eventually I fell back asleep. When I woke up in the morning, one of my roommates who I was sure had been asleep mentioned to me that the wardrobe was shaking, but she had assumed she had been asleep. Other people in other parts of the house had also noted strange things, such as the door swinging open or humming in the basement rooms. It still makes me feel majorly creeped out. The house has been torn down in the last few years, but it has always stuck in my mind. 47. Somewhere down in the far south tip of Baja, Mexico, and decided to take a paved road up into a slightly mountain area. There were large holes in the road, but it otherwise was in good shape, looked like rockslides or something. Proceeded further and further. There was nothing around. What could this paved road lead to? Nothing else around was paved. After a few miles I see green in the distance, and blue behind it. A small coastal town. But what was so special? Why did it have a paved road? And streetlights? I drive in and find a place poorer and less kept than where I had been staying just a few miles further south. I buy a bottle of water from the only shop open in town and nope out of there. The locals were all really nice, but there was no reason for the paved road and streetlights. Something seemed up. Instead of going back the way I came, I drove along the coast, a rough road, but as I went around one turn there was an airport. Well, an airstrip with a resort surrounding it. WT. Kept driving. Looked the place up later and I found the airstrip but could find nothing about the town slightly further north. I cannot find the town again and cannot remember the name of the airstrip and resort, which was visited by Hollywood stars in the 50s or 60s. 48. Oh yeah, I have one. Years ago, my wife and I were driving from NH to PA. The route we took just clipped the corner of NJ, but somehow we got lost and ended up driving into Newark. Now I'd never been to Newark, and I didn't know anything about it either. But as soon as we got there, I had the most horrible feeling. Like a feeling of dread, but 1,000 times stronger. Like we were near something evil. I felt fear, and an irrational panic. See, I'm a pragmatic atheist. I don't believe in the supernatural or anything like that. But at that moment, well, I immediately looked for any sign that would get us on a route out of that place. I didn't care which direction, just out. I made it out alive, and I've never been back to that hellhole. My spine shivers just telling the story. 49. We flew into Newark once. That place is the worst. Sorry, any Newark inhabitants. We were wandering around the airport at 10 o'clock at night and literally no employee would speak to us. I felt like we were invisible. We stayed in a creepy hotel that night and I swore to never, ever go back to Newark. 50. In my late teens, my girlfriend and I went on a cross-country road trip from Michigan to California one summer, camping along the way. We pull into a campground around 10 p.m. and set up our tent under one of several sets of floodlights that were illuminating much of the campground. We don't see any other tents or cars, which is a little unusual for a campground, but not completely out of the ordinary. While we're setting up, we can hear other people in the distance, but either they're not having regular conversation or they're not close enough for us to appreciate anything other than occasional words/sounds. We also don't see any lanterns, flashlights, or a campfire. Again, there were floodlights illuminating the area, so they may not have had lights or a fire, but I'll freely admit that being able to hear people without seeing them got the hairs on my neck standing up a little. I didn't want to admit to my girlfriend that I was scared, so I ignored the uneasy feeling and powered on. We get the tent set up and get into our sleeping bags. We're laying there listening to the sounds, which are obviously getting closer, but also seem to be deliberately getting quieter, which is unsettling. My girlfriend and I are whispering to each other, but neither of us admits to being terrified, until the floodlights suddenly cut out and the now nearby people start making a lot more noise, both verbal, yet still mostly indiscernible, and the sound of their activity. My girlfriend and I both immediately abandon any sense of pride either of us had about being brave and each say we want to get out of there now. Our vehicle was a typical late 80s sedan already packed completely full of our stuff, so not a lot of spare cargo space. Nevertheless, we managed to cram that still fully set up tent, with both sleeping bags inside, into the back seat in under a minute in the pitch black before taking off like a bat out of hell. We drove for almost an hour before spending the night in the car in a CVS parking lot. 51. I take lots of road trips and avoid the interstate and main highways, so end up driving through some interesting places. The only places where the shockingly dilapidated structures, unnerving total absence of people or presence of frightening looking locals that made me speed on my way as quickly as possible were Trina, California, Hazard, Kentucky, and Greenville, Mississippi. I hate saying that though, because despite the hills have eyes vibes, I know the only thing wrong with those places is crippling poverty. 52. Back when flip phones were top of the line. 2004-ish on a fraternity brother road trip late at night. Almost out of gas. Pull off the interstate to fill up. Find the first gas station and pull in. Middle of nowhere, center of the state, swampy, redneck, Florida. No lights anywhere. The place looks abandoned. A couple of brothers scout the area. Find pieces and parts of gas nozzles. Think to myself, well, let's see what happens. Put the debit card in the machine. Approved. Fill up the tank. Confused. Leave spooky gas station. 53. It wasn't really a place, but I've got an eerie story. I was watching The Ring with a friend on Skype. We had the movie playing while we were on a video call so that we could watch it together, and as I was getting ready to start the movie, pouring tea, getting a snack, etc., I got a nosebleed. I didn't really think anything of it at that time, I just thought it was due to the heat or the lack of humidity. Just as we finally sat down to start the movie, my nosebleed got a nosebleed too, and I got a bit spooked because it was such an odd coincidence. Well, when we got to the point in the movie where the woman gets a nosebleed, we just couldn't watch it anymore. I think I told him we had to turn it off and I was too spooked. I made him watch cartoons with me instead, and I couldn't sleep well that night. I've been very opposed to scary movies in general since they leave me pretty paranoid for months, but this one has always been on my mind. 54. About 8 years ago my friend and I went hiking in Globe, Arizona. On the drive we took a wrong turn due to my horrible sense of direction. We finally end up on the correct road and get to 3 or so different paths. We were unsure of which was the trailhead for the hike, so we asked a lady on her horse with her dogs which way was correct. She pointed us in the right direction, and we went on our way. Maybe a mile or so into the hike the trail is flooded a little. My friend went ahead to check the trail out to make sure we could still keep going. We end up going further and avoiding most of the water. At this point I am second-guessing myself if this was really the trail the hike was on, and getting a little worried we went off the trail a bit. After maybe 1/2 mile of walking on the path that was flooded, we ended up at a dead end. There was a fence with a private property sign and a windmill. We ended up turning back. It didn't help that there was a creepy abandoned shack not much further. We never did find the trailhead. I took photos I'll share. 55. In from Indiana. One day, while walking around in an abandoned building in my town, I and my friends all thought we heard and saw a man with a beard walking around. Not unusual. Homeless people are everywhere. After going deeper, the room we heard the noise in was absolutely packed with junk and covered in spider webs. No one could have moved around in there. We scoured the entire building and found no such man. We went back to double-check the room we heard the noise from and discovered a door. We moved the stuff to get to the door. It opened to a small closet. On the wall, drawn in the dust, was a heart. It was clear enough to take a picture, but shortly after my phone was broken, and I couldn't recover anything. This little heart meant a lot to me. My girlfriend had a family member that was close to her who was born with a backwards heart. They did the surgeries required as a young child, but they were unable to fully develop. She died at 21 or 22. Every year, they give heart-shaped presents. Her family really believes that when they see hearts it's her telling them that she's okay up in heaven. I thought it was just me. But all four of us saw and heard it. And to see that heart. It was unexplainable. 56. Not really creepy, more just an example of how light and shadow can easily trick the mind, hopefully. When I was around 15 or 16, me and a couple of friends were riding around the suburbs in our pushiest. In one suburb we come into a cul-de-sac and see something that stops us dead in our tracks. At the end of the street is a property whose fence looked made entirely of bone. I think the sight made our imaginations go a little wild because to us, the house it guarded just oozed malevolence. It was dark and forbidding, no light shone from within, bearing in mind this was around midnight, so, duh. We decided against lingering and took off for home talking excitedly about what we had all seen. I can't remember how soon it was, but we decided to try to find the house again. We went during the daytime, because why take chances? And after riding around the suburb we felt like we found the right street and ride down to the end of the cul-de-sac, and where we thought to find the creepy house, there was instead a sinkhole. The rest of the street was perfectly normal. I'm just full of it, the house was, and fence was just a normal looking place by day, so we rode off feeling stupid. 57. This isn't the creepiest but it's pretty cool I guess. The Halloween I was 13 I went trick-or-treating by myself, so social and cool I know, in this small town basically in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by fields. It was darkish but lit by streetlights and decorations etc., and it was about 8. Almost all people had gone inside, and I was killing time by myself mostly next to a field. I look out into the field and it's pitch black. An absolute wall of darkness. I could put my toes in and not be able to see them but be standing in streetlight. It was like a barrier of darkness surrounding the town. 58. There's a Gothic revival mansion near where I used to live that was abandoned and is believed to be haunted. It now serves as a bat sanctuary, and I visited part of it at night as part of a Cub Scouts outing. That place gave me chills and I can see why people would think it'd be haunted. It doesn't help that there have been some deaths in the area and in a remote part of a forest. 59. I guess I should tell this one, not me but my mother. I think there was an old restaurant she used to work at. One day she was passing through and decided to visit. She walked in the door real quick, it was open and busy, she walked out. Come to find out a few months later that it has actually been under new management and even changed its name like a few years ago. Now that she thinks back she says she remembered hearing people in there talking in the sounds of the kitchen, but she said she never actually saw anyone. 60. Out the road in Juneau, Alaska, when I was about 13 to 14, I was out hiking on a trail out to one of the coves out there. When we got to the cove there was a group of people enjoying the sunshine, rare, by using a big-ass rope swing that was set up on a small cliff. The jump/fall must have been about 30 to 40 feet to the water. It was amazing to take part in it. I've been hunting for the cove it was set up in 4 or 5 years now, and every single cliff I've found has rocks that would muck your world up if you tried jumping off a rope swing there. I still wonder what the hell happened to it. 61. When I was about 5 my family and I went on a drive up the mountains. The truck we were in was pumping exhaust into the car and we all suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning. My infant sister had passed out, we were all sick. My dad rushed us to the nearest hospital. The Tooele Hospital in Utah. By 95, when this story happened, it was barely running. I remember being wicked in with my family all put into one room with just our beds we were wheeled in on. My dad refused to be treated until us kids were okay. I remember there being nothing in this room, barely any light and no equipment. They brought everything in. It was very smelly and dingy. Now the weird part is that by '95 the hospital was not in use. It had officially closed a year before and it was in the process of half of it being turned into an old folks' home. I don't know who the staff treated us, I don't know how they treated us in such a rundown place. Today the place is considered a hotbed of ghost activity and is one of the most haunted places in Utah. I have no explanations on who treated us, but I am happy that my infant sister didn't die. I was on a family road trip when we drove through Vail, Colorado. Maybe it's normal now, but when we drove through there was a lot of new construction, nice buildings, restaurants, but not a single soul to be seen. It was the weirdest thing. 62, in 2010 a friend and I were in Atlanta, Georgia for a conference. We were tired of hotel food, so we wandered around and found this little Italian restaurant that had good, cheap hoagies. My friend and I got food and then went back to the hotel. The next day, some of the others wanted to go out to eat, and we suggested the Italian place. My friend and I went back to the place the night before, and the place was shut down, no tables or chairs inside, no sign out front, and not a single thing on the walls inside. The Italian restaurant disappeared overnight. 63, there's a famous house up in Villisca. Some sort of wanderer asks to stay with the family for a short while. Ever since strange occurrences kept happening. No definable voices, screaming, strange markings. Eventually the dad killed his whole family and the wanderer with an axe. The dad was never seen again. They made a movie of it and were selling it at their local convenience stores. Kind of kills the move to see someone profit off it, but whatever. I used to live on an island in Georgia when I was in college. It was an awesome hookup. My dad and his wife decided they wanted to travel on their boat when they retired, but they kept their condo and let me rent it from them for 3 years. It was honestly an once-in-a-lifetime scenario that could never be repeated. Ages 23 to 26 were spent on this island. The beach was 30 yards away. I was a middle-class kid who found himself in the absolute coolest living situation ever. The condo was part of a large complex that was oceanside. However, the condo complex right next door to us was completely abandoned. I'm talking 150 units right on the ocean that were just empty. I never got the full story, but apparently the management company either went bankrupt or just decided to abandon the condos. Are used to bringing friends over and we would walk around the abandoned complex at night and smoke and have a good time. We even went into one of the abandoned units. It was such a crazy eerie feeling, being on the balcony of an apartment that had been gutted and had no lights and no furniture, overlooking the ocean. I even took a few girls there on a late-night walk, and they absolutely loved it. The journey to get there was also really incredible. We had to walk on an abandoned road through the forest at night, 10 yards away from the ocean. I will never forget that place, and I will never forget how awesome of an opportunity one had to live at my place. But that was such a crazy thing. I even brought a few girls there on a late-night walk, and they absolutely loved it. The journey to get there was also really incredible. We had to walk on an abandoned road through the forest at night, 10 yards away from the ocean. I will never forget that place, and I will never forget how awesome of an opportunity one had to live at my place. But that was such a crazy thing, seeing the millions of dollars of worth of ocean condos remaining completely empty, on the land that cost millions of dollars. And these things were there for a good 5 years. They eventually got torn down and replaced with new luxury condominiums, but that place was a sight to be seen. 64. I and my best friend at the time were trick-or-treating in a neighborhood we were unfamiliar with. We were around 10 or 11. We stopped at a park to check out our haul and lost track of time, realizing it was just before midnight. We start heading back to our part of town when we see a spinning beam of red light, kind of like a toy lightsaber. We thought it looked pretty neat and wanted to see the kid who was doing it, so we started walking towards it. As we get closer we can see that in fact, there is no lid controlling this light. We stop and are trying to figure out what to do. It stops spinning, pointed straight up in the air. Then just like that it disappears, we freak out and book it in the opposite direction.
65. My husband and I were driving with our daughter to San Jose, California from Washington State to visit family. It's about a 13-hour drive and we needed gas just after entering California. We see signs for a diner/gas station, so we pull off the highway. It's getting dark but still twilight, so we could see a little around us, despite the trees and lack of street lights. We drove down this dark road to what looked like a diner and a few gas pumps. There were several cars, and I mean at least 7 to 10, but not a single person in sight. We couldn't see anyone inside the building, no one in the cars, and no one at the pumps. Already a little nervous, we discussed turning around and going to the next exit instead. At that moment a man comes walking out of the diner, which was very dimly lit, holding something long but unidentifiable in his hand. It was darker by this point, and we couldn't make out his face, but we immediately noted out of there as fast as we could while creepy dude just stood there tearing after us. Straight out of a horror movie. We still talk about it to this day, and the next time we drove down there, we couldn't even find the exit for the creepy diner. This was about 13 years ago now, and is still one of the scariest things I've witnessed. 66. I know I'm probably late to this, and that this one isn't that scary, but back just before New Year's in 2013 I was driving with my boyfriend, now husband, back to Nebraska since I would be considered AWOL if I was there later than the 3rd. We made the trip in about 2 days, but I'll never forget that we were about 30 minutes away from the base, and it had begun to snow. As we followed the GPS, we went through this tiny little town. Everything was so quiet and still and almost magical. There weren't any people out, and we didn't stop in the town since it was getting dark, and we were so close to being done with the trip, 18 to 20 hours of driving total. After that, I spent nearly 2 years trying to find that town again. I eventually did find it, but for those 2 years, I was convinced that it didn't exist. 67. One time I and my boyfriend were looking for an empty dark parking lot so we could park the car and just get away from his house for a little bit. His parents and brothers were home, so we just wanted some time alone. Originally we had a parking lot we would go to where an old vet used to be, but we realized there was a no trespassing sign there and it wasn't worth getting in trouble for, so we went off to find a new parking spot. We found a church and the parking lot was empty and dark. We decided we would pull it in and check it out. The second we pulled in I got this weird sick feeling in my stomach and had this gut feeling something was off about the place. I didn't know what it was. I had mentioned it to my boyfriend, and he said that he had gotten the exact same thing the second we pulled in. We turned around immediately and found a different parking lot. I have never had that feeling before. It just felt like some really bad was going to happen there.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.